Hello everyone and welcome back to Fifth Period, a podcast hosted by two media teachers where each week we take a look at a new film and break down all our favourite and sometimes not so favourite moments. I'm Mr. Brown and with me as always is co-host
Mr. Whittle. Hello everyone. I am very excited to be sitting opposite Mr. Brown today for the film that we are going to discuss. I think what we're going to find is that it's just a bit of a cavalcade of adulation where we have a film that's been chosen by the students, which they always are, which is what we want. We want students from our Film Appreciation Club to tell us what films they want to watch each week. And last week they delivered the goods, Mr. Brown.
We couldn't have chose better ourselves. It is one of my absolute favourites. It is in my top 10 films of all time, and it's probably ranked pretty high on my most seen films of all time. It has a lot of rewatch value.
Wow. Yeah, okay. I wouldn't say it's in my top 10 films, but it absolutely is a classic that I love. So yeah, you're going to hear nothing but good things. I mean, maybe we've got some criticisms here and there, but generally speaking, you're going to hear good things.
Yeah, and after last week, which was a less favourable choice for us, this is a bit of a palate cleanser for us.
Yes, it was funny. On the weekend, I had a conversation with a family friend, and I said, I was talking movies with her, and I said, so what's your favourite movie? She said, Top Gun. And I said, wow! Listen to the podcast we just released, because we just ragged on it pretty much for 45 minutes straight. I mean, more or less, yeah.
Have I met this friend?
No.
Oh, well, she's not going to be a fan of me after she hears what I have to say.
But we won't be doing that this week. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case for our film.
Yeah, you could say with complete confidence that we've got nothing but good things to say. So
the grand reveal is that the film is
Back to the Future.
1985's Back to the Future, directed by Robert Zemeckis.
Every time I watch this, in fact, I think I said to you during film club, I don't need to watch this.
Yes, that's what you said.
I won't have to look over this again. I know it like the back of my hand. And while I didn't need to watch it, always a good excuse, you know?
Yes, I wasn't in the same camp as you as to having seen it that many times that I would be able to recite it word for word, but I have seen it plenty of times, and I think I mentioned the little anecdote of how I watched it as a kid when I was getting babysat at the ripe age of like 7 or 8 years old, so we're talking like early 90s, late 80s for Mr. Whittle. Yes, I'm revealing my age. But yeah, there was one of the films that the family that I'd go and get babysit after school with would like have on video, and we'd just watch it and watch it and watch it again. Yeah, it really was one of those ones where it's kind of a rite of passage to experience Back to the Future as a kid.
Yeah, and it was always one that was used in advertising a lot as well. I remember It's going to be such a foreign concept for people now, but when video stores was still a thing and you would see Blockbuster ads, and Back to the Future was always one of the ones that they would use to advertise like what great films they had.
When I was watching the film just last night, there's one scene in it which I'm like, I've seen that recently, and I recalled that it was actually used as part of a collage of like the greatest films of all time, or what something where like a video like essay was demonstrating what great film is, and it was a scene from Back to the Future. I'm like, of course a scene from Back to the Future is going to be used in anything that is about great films.
I mean, even going into today, I did write notes because there were just so many things I loved about it, and I wrote some things.
Some things. He's got 2 pages of notes in front of him, guys.
3 pages. 3 pages of notes.
3 pages in 8-size font.
It's notes of appreciation. Certainly not things that I needed to remember. Going over the film, it's not something I needed road marks. Oh, in fact, where we were going, I didn't need roads.
He's done it, people. Yes, very good.
Had to throw one in early in case we didn't get a pun later on.
Now, obviously, with that in mind, that you have a raft of notes to go through, I think we should just jump straight in. Obviously, doing the usual of telling everyone to like and subscribe our podcast if they haven't already. What our podcast is trying to get done is to give you guys an opportunity to hear the conversation around a film that we're watching, Film Appreciation Club.
Yeah, so feedback is kind of key for us at this point. We are still early days in this process, and we're trying to kind of find our feet with it a little bit as well. So if you write comments for films that you'd like us to talk about in the future, if you write comments on segments that you would like us to do, last week we did a countdown of quotes We could do favorite moments. We could do a little bit of trivia. So we're always looking for suggestions. So please, making sure you comment to give us a bit of feedback as well.
Please do. Okay, so yes, let's talk 1985's Back to the Future.
All right, so let's start off from the beginning. I feel like I'm going to have to go through this sequentially just because I have something I want to say in virtually every scene that happens.
Go.
But starting off in Doc's office with Marty coming in, just in the opening it kind of pans through the office and shows you a variety of different things there, and you just gauge so much information in such a short space of time. I mean, the whole office sequence only goes for about 5 minutes and you learn heaps, but even in the first 30 seconds of just panning over his desk and his inventions and things like that, I mean, you hear the news report about the fact that plutonium's been stolen.
Which obviously, if you haven't seen the film, like, that's just like, why are we zooming in on this? Like, it seems like something random. So it works within the fact that as a first-time viewer, you're just being immersed into a world. So it's like just this random messy room, right? And like, what's it all about? So you don't know that is speaking to something later in the story.
Speaking of things later in the story, we should put out our spoiler warning.
Yep.
I think at this point they probably know that we're going to delve into some pretty big plot details.
Well, after they've listened to the podcast, they can build their own DeLorean time machine, go back to before they listen to the podcast.
And watch it with fresh eyes.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
But yes, so they give us so much information in that first scene. And one thing that I always say, I mean, we're media teachers, we talk through this kind of stuff in class all the time, but one thing I always say is that there's nothing that's ever in a film by accident. They don't just go, oh, I wasn't really feeling like directing today, so I just told the production team to chuck whatever they wanted in it. It's always there for a specific reason, whether that's something that's meaning-making or symbolism, or just something that's a lot more basic, like just creating the world and kind of working towards an eerie vibe or a science fiction vibe or whatever it might be. But I think Back to the Future is one of the best examples of layering their storytelling and including a lot of kind of props and key bits of information that then come back up in the storyline later on, and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I remember seeing that earlier.
To expand on that, I mean, wholeheartedly agree with you. That is a great example of how everything that's presented to the audience is deliberate in nature and it's part of the narrative, but they do it so efficiently. Like, there's many examples of films that do that, but it doesn't mean it's entertaining, all right? So they may put a plot device forward, or they may give some foreshadowing, but doesn't mean that it's enjoyable and it feels like it's part of the momentum is being maintained, whereas this film does that well.
100%. I mean, sometimes exposition can seem really, really clunky,
yes,
but this one kind of layers things in there without you necessarily knowing that they're key plot details until much later in the film. When we first open, we get a heap of different clocks, and this is something that is present throughout the entire film. I mean, clocks are everywhere. If you go back and have a rewatch, in every single sequence, there are clocks in there. Sometimes they're really obvious, sometimes they're hidden in the background, but it's just constantly reminding you of the importance of time in the film. Mm-hmm. Time in the fact that they travel through time, but also time as in one of the major lessons of the film is there's always time to change your life and kind of make it what you want it to be.
Yep.
And so we open with all of these clocks, and all of the clocks are set to the same time. But one thing that I found really interesting, there's a photo of a clock and a man hanging off the clock. Now, this is so interesting because obviously later on in the film, there's a bit of foreshadowing there with Doc hanging onto the clock, but I recognized it because there is a very famous film called Safety Last, where a stuntman holds onto a clock. I wrote down his name, Harold Lloyd, and he's hanging onto a clock within the film, and that's where this idea of Doc doing the same thing later in the film comes from. And so in this picture, it's kind of a representation of that other film, Safety Last, but it's not an actual still from the movie, because what they've done is they've taken a photo of him hanging onto the clock at the exact same time that all the other clocks are set to. So this is a photo which they can't change, but they would have had to kind of line everything up perfectly so that matched all of the clocks that were...
Well, yeah, the clocks are set to a particular time. That does come up later in the narrative as to what the time is, because Doc calls Marty and Marty realizes he's late for school because of the time differential, that kind of thing. So yeah, sorry, I'm probably stealing from another 25 points that you want to make about.
No. I'll need you to reel me in throughout this, because I will get excited and start talking about obscure older films that people have never heard of. So, I mean, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes facts and things that I've learnt over the years about Back to the Future, and I will bring up a couple of those as we're going through today. But what I really tried to do was look at it and notice things from my own perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah, the safety last reference is one that I've known for quite some time, but it was only in this viewing that I realized that the clock is also set to the same time in the still image. Right. So it's really fun going back and rewatching things and just always picking up on something new.
And like that just again speaks to the point you wanted to make earlier about Zemeckis' precision with the creation and the construction of this world, and what he's trying to achieve in terms of the story, where everything is deliberate, everything has a reason it's done that way, like including the setting, including the props, all the sponsorships that are mentioned so that he could fund it. Because I think in this opening scene...
I'm so glad you brought it up.
We hear an ad for
Toyota, which is the same car that Marty aspires to get, and the same one he ends up with at the end.
Yes.
Yeah, they go really early. The Toyota ad happens on the radio before we see the news report. And yeah, I mean, throughout the film, there's the Toyota representation. There's Diet Pepsi that comes up a lot.
A lot of Pepsi, but yeah, like I don't know whether you know, but like you probably do. But in the '80s, like the sugar-free and diet stuff was really hitting its stride with being promoted. So they call it Pepsi Free. Is that right? And,
yeah, because they have. You want a Pepsi, you got to pay for it.
Yeah, and so this whole kind of diet thing that Marty kind of revisits again and again. I want something without sugar. He's having a healthy meal while his dad's eating the peanut brittle at the dinner table and stuff like that.
Well, even when Biff wants a beer later on, all you got is Bud Light.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other big sponsorship obviously being Nike. That becomes more prominent in the sequels with the Nike mags. But in this film, both Doc and Marty wear Nikes. It's really prominent in Marty's outfit, but if you notice the first time he and Doc actually get together, Doc is also wearing Nike shoes as well.
But then there's also the zoom-ins on the Goodyears on the DeLorean, and then, I mean, the DeLorean itself has kind of got a sponsorship deal. The DeLorean's got a really weird history as a car.
It was known for being an unreliable automobile. So I certainly wouldn't call it a sponsorship, because they even point out how unreliable the car is.
Yeah, so maybe like it's being brought in contrast to the Toyota, because they didn't want to personally put forward the DeLorean is great. And there are scenes where the DeLorean does let them down, which adds to the narrative tension. But the last one I picked up on was JVC, so the camera as well.
Lots of close-ups of that.
Yes. So lots of sponsorship going throughout.
But yeah, this first scene just really delivers on a lot of information. Like, we learn Doc's an inventor. We learn that he's a little bit absent-minded, like he's left all his equipment on.
But like, how much do we learn about the Doc as a character without having met him? We like that opening scene, and then he's calling Marty again at about 12:30, reminding him to come to bring the camera.
Yeah,
all of these things before the reveal of who Doc is. Aesthetically, we've learned so much about Doc.
And we know he's already stolen plutonium because we heard the report and then see it under the table. Likewise with Marty, we very quickly learn he's pretty carefree. He's often late for school. He is into music, but he's a bit reckless. He turns everything up as loud as possible.
Now, Marty might be late for school, but he's right on time for some Huey Lewis.
Oh, yeah, he is.
So, The Power of Love as a song in this film, it speaks to that whole 80s vibe of like having songs that match the film and kind of represent the film. We saw that with Top Gun. We saw it with Ferris Bueller as well. Films of this era certainly have accompanying soundtracks that usually have like one big hit at least that comes through.
Yeah, so Huey Lewis actually recorded 2 tracks for the film. The Power of Love being one of them, but the other one being Back in Time, which we actually hear later on in the film. Mm-hmm. I adore that soundtrack. And when it's playing and he's going through the town holding onto the car, a bit of foreshadowing of later on when he's going to do the skateboard chase and hold onto the car. Again, something I only noticed in this viewing, he goes past the jazz studio and waves at all the girls in the window.
Mm-hmm.
It's the jazz studio is what was the diner back in the 50s.
Oh,
and
okay.
during the skateboard chase, when he goes past the diner, he waves at all the people in the diner. Like, it's so fun.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much.
So it's the power of love that's driving Marty to take Jennifer out for the big trip, and then he gets home to find that Biff has totaled the car. Now, it was like I've seen this movie at least 20 times, probably closer to 30 or 40. This was the first time that I really became aware of the whole car thing being a real character driver, something that motivates, like a character motivator for Marty. And like that's why when we return to it at the end, when he gets the Toyota, like that's him being rewarded as a character. But he's really pushed with like wanting a car, this desire as a 17-year-old to take the car. And then the DeLorean coming in and being a car itself. The time machine could have taken any form in terms of the film, right? But the fact that they chose to make it a car, like Marty and the idea of a car taking him forward and getting him what he wants is really kind of prevalent through the film. And this was the first time I realised it.
Yeah, and I love the first reveal of the car too. So it's prior to him getting home, but it's after the school sequence, and we see it on like the back of a trailer, and he kind of like steps forward and he looks at it, and it's like this really glamorous thing. And I like that he refers to it as someday.
Yes.
Like there's so many references to like future and like, it's really, really great.
Yeah.
Jennifer also, she has quite a small role in this film, but Claudia Wells just nails it. I mean, she's the superior Jennifer, which is controversial because, I mean, I love Elizabeth Shue as well, but I always find it really difficult to get on board when actors are replaced in films.
You're talking about into the sequel of Back to the Future 2, yeah.
Even though she doesn't do all that much, I feel like it's kind of like his driving force. He's like, I got to get back. I got to see Jennifer, right? Like, without implementing her there and without her writing the phone number on the Save the Clock Tower banner, like, so many plot points are set up in that little moment, and they all have to kind of line up and work together to make that fit.
Yes.
I think they have tremendous chemistry, and then it was a similar sort of thing to what we were talking about with Top Gun, where they kiss and then the power of love comes back in again. It's kind of like that's the soundtrack to their love.
Yeah.
Before we completely jump away from the power of love, we should probably mention the Huey Lewis cameo.
Yes, yeah.
So when Marty is trialing out for the Battle of the Bands, they play a cover of The Power of Love as their audition song, and it's Huey Lewis that actually tells him that it's too damn loud.
What I love is when Huey Lewis is one of the four on the panel, is sitting down listening to Marty, that overstated look to the left and look to the right that he does as to what the other judges are thinking before he stands up and says, no, you don't get the look in. I just love that Huey Lewis was told to act in that manner, and he just delivers the goods. I love it. Yeah,
it's a really nice representation of how easily Marty's confidence can be shook.
Yes.
Because he seems to be far more confident than George. He has this kind of air about him. Even later in the film, we see him getting frustrated with George's lack of confidence. He's saying lines like, yeah, history's going to change and all this kind of stuff, and yet as soon as he's turned down on something, it completely shatters his confidence.
The false bravado thing, like Marty as a character, as a protagonist in this kind of film, has depth as a character. It's really impressive to see, it's the relationship with the father, with George, that really builds that for us, the audience, to see who Marty is and where he thinks that he is going to be fine and he's brave, but then he's not, and he faces fears and overcomes obstacles. Marty as a character has a lot going on.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of go, oh, that's a bit of a turnaround for him, and then we get back to his house and we see how much George is getting bossed around by Biff, and you go, that makes sense.
And Marty's
grown up with
Marty's shame that he feels, it's so evident how ashamed he is of his father not standing up for himself, but he has the pride not to confront Biff about it himself. Or maybe it's not pride, he also feels that fear about Biff as well. But he'll talk to his dad about it afterwards, like, Dad, why aren't you standing up for yourself? And George is full of empty excuses. And yeah, it's really, the family dynamic at that dinner table is fantastic. Now, while we refer to the dinner table, it came across my mind that Mr. Brown, also being a drama teacher of sorts, I reckon you would have a Crispin Glover as George McFly laughing at the dinner table impersonation that you could knock out. Just that particular laugh purely exemplifies why Crispin Glover is a delight in this film. Like, there's many reasons why, but that one's a strong contender for one of the best things.
I think it's Dave. His son gives him a kiss goodbye and says, "Whoo, time to change that aftershave." And he's laughing but repeating. It's like, time to change that aftershave. It's like half the words come out in the laugh. It's just, it's very good. But no, it's certainly not one of those impressions that I've been working on over the years.
I adore Crispin Glover in this film. I adore him in general. So as a side note, if anyone wants to really digress and dig into who Crispin Glover is as an artist, he went a bit, some would say he went off the rails. He just went down a very much more alternative route as an artist. There's an album he released in 1989 that's full of weird tracks, and he's done a lot of weird stuff since. So if you want to dig in and find out about Crispin Glover and maybe why he didn't get a look in for being returned for Back to the Future.
Do you want to touch on that?
I mean, we don't want to make this about Back to the Future 2. That might be a separate podcast, but we can touch on a little... I think it's inevitable that we talk about Back to the Future 2 a little bit here and there throughout this one.
Maybe we should wait till the end, because I guess it's to do with the resolution of the film as well.
Very good. Yep, for sure. But yeah, Crispin Glover at the dinner table, Crispin Glover throughout this film. Just adore him.
I just love how dysfunctional it is. Like, the mum's drinking. Dave has a job at like a Chuck E. Cheese or something.
Pause. Do you know who Dave is as an actor and what else he's been in? There's your little bit of trivia. I looked at him and go, I know him from something else. And I had to look it up because it couldn't come to mind. Do you know where you know Dave from?
No.
He plays Jimmy Olsen in the Superman film, so that's Dave in Back to the Future. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, digression.
But no, I love the conversation that they have, especially Marty's mum saying she never chased after boys when she was his age.
Yes.
And as we learned throughout the film, that's definitely not the case.
Yes. But that dysfunctional family through that scene alone is really well represented and really sets up a lot of the story, but also Marty as a character for sure.
Yeah, and a lot more foreshadowing as well. She's trying to tell the story of when they met, thinking that George was bird watching, and he was obviously being a peeping Tom. And I just love that. What was it again, George? Bird watching? What, Lorraine? What? And you don't think much of it at the time. You just think he's not really paying much attention. And then obviously it's revealed later. So just all those fun details. Like, anytime we do see something, it's something we're going to see again or have some sort of reference to again. Like, even the sets showing everything looking like old and run down. I think at the cinema they're playing like adult films in Marty's time period, and then everything's innocent and wholesome again when it goes back. The attention to detail is outstanding.
Yeah. So I think we will trot along to when Marty meets up with Doc in the car park of which mall?
Twin Pines Mall.
Twin Pines. I nearly said Twin Peaks. Yeah,
wow, got an interesting one on the Twin Pines Mall as well. So when Marty first arrives, obviously we see a sign which has a clock on it. Again, another reminder of time.
Yes.
But it also says Twin Pines Mall, and there's a picture of 2 trees on it. Now when Marty comes back to that same spot at the end of the film, the sign has changed and it actually says Lone Pine Mall, and it's got 1 tree on it. And that's because when Marty goes back to the 50s, he ends up running over one of the Peabody pine trees.
Yep.
And so it ends up changing the name of the mall in the end. So it's really interesting that those kind of things are just everywhere in the film. And that's not something that they ever spell out for you. You have to be a pretty eagle-eyed viewer to even notice that that's there.
But how much fun would they have had script writing this film, and then like also maybe ideas like that come up during production as well? But you know, they clearly had fun thinking this film through. So yeah, going back to that idea of deliberate construction of ideas, and also just reiterating that film is an art form. And so when something like this is constructed and delivered, it's you've got to appreciate all the nuance that goes in with something as small as that, right?
Yeah, 100%. One of the best things about this sequence, and it's not necessarily people's go-to for the whole reveal of the DeLorean. I mean, it looks fantastic, the smoke, and the DeLorean itself was picked because it's a spaceship-looking type car.
Cool. I love the DeLorean.
But I think visually, one of the best things about this scene is that it had rained previously, and that the whole ground is like this
slick,
shimmering, slick surface.
Yep.
It really adds to that kind of sci-fi quality.
Yeah.
Everything's shiny, and it just, I think that's a stroke of genius to do that.
Yeah. What I love about this scene, the note that I took from this scene was the real introduction into the film score in this scene. So when Einstein gets put in the DeLorean and sent off into the past, what's this, the logistics on that? Does he get sent into the past, and therefore the minute jumps backward?
No, he gets sent 1 minute into the future,
and then he loses the minute.
That minute,
yeah. So the score that comes in at that particular moment from Alan Silvestri is the composer of that score. It reminded me that I would argue that Alan Silvestri's score is in competition with anything that John Williams did for Star Wars and for Superman. It's got a real kind of Williams-esque vibe, but it's also got like Danny Elfman, who did like all the Burton films and stuff like that, with a bit more quirkiness into it. And we hear it throughout the film for different things, like the Marty Triumphant, which is the main theme that we hear, but also when Doc's up in the clock. If you listen to the score of this film, you really can like appreciate how much has gone into developing tension through the score, all the things that you want from a score, but it's done so well.
Yeah, and there's really subtle things in it too. I mean, obviously evoking moods if there's supposed to be scenes that are a little bit more eerie. Like later on in the film where they go to get the DeLorean from behind the sign and it's dark and it's windy and it's almost like a haunted soundtrack.
Yep.
And like during the science fiction theater sequence, it's got more of a space type quality to it. So the soundtrack evolves throughout the film, and it really helps kind of, all film soundtracks will help you emote with the characters, but
if they're done well.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the attention to detail is fantastic.
Yeah.
I also love in this sequence too, when he first comes skating down the hill, he goes past this giant stop sign on the road. Just like a bit of foreshadowing, look out, something bad's about to happen.
As Marty does skate down towards the mall car park, I did think to myself, did Michael J. Fox learn how to skateboard specifically for this film, do you reckon? He was 24 years old when this film was made, so he was a bit older, but I reckon Michael J. Fox by that point had been around for a while in the TV shows that he'd done. He was a bit of a cool kid, so I reckon he would have...
He probably already knew how to, and I say that only knowing that originally he was not... Well, he was their first choice for Marty McFly, but couldn't commit to the film because he was doing... is it Family Values?
Yeah,
What was the... Is that the one he was on?
Family Ties.
Family Ties,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
And he couldn't commit to it because of the schedule, so they ended up getting Eric Stoltz in, and they shot a couple of scenes and it just wasn't working. And then they kind of made the schedule work around him, so he would come and film his stuff at nights after shooting Family Ties during the day. So knowing that his schedule was that tight, I don't think he would have had time to learn how to skateboard.
Yeah, so hopefully you already knew, yeah.
Cool. All right, so... This is the first time we meet Doc. Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox's chemistry is just outstanding.
Yes.
At no point, I mean, it's quite an odd relationship, just this crazy old scientist and a young kid, but at no point do you ever question the fact that they're friends.
Nope.
Because they just vibe. They are just so good on screen. I mean, I can't imagine Eric Stoltz doing the role.
No, I can't either. And I like Eric Stoltz as an actor. He's done some great stuff.
Oh, absolutely,
but,
yeah.
I just cannot see anyone else, like you said, bringing the dynamics between those two actors. Is just, it's a match made in heaven.
It really is, yeah. So, as you said, they send Einie 1 minute into the future. I love, again, attention to detail. It pretty much is about a minute in real time as well.
Yes, I noticed that as well.
Maybe like 1:15.
I love it when, if they're going to, if a film's going to talk about time and how time goes, and talk about like a minute passing or 5 minutes passing. They did it again with the 4 minutes between 10 and 10:04 at the end of the film.
Yes,
and I just appreciate that the director took the time, no pun intended, to make it actually feel the minute. Like he worked out the minute. He works out the 4 minutes.
Yeah. So that's great. Einie goes into the future. Oh, Einie obviously being a reference to Albert Einstein.
Yes.
I think, is it in the 50s his dog Copernicus?
Yes, and then he's also talking to a photo of Thomas Edison when he's trying to work out the gigawatts.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so like
so lots of references to different inventors, different mathematicians throughout time.
Yeah,
as well.
Doc Brown has a respect for his peers.
He's a big nerd, but so are we, so that's fine. There was a line he threw in about, you could go and find out who wins the next 25 World Series.
Yes.
He says that. I love that. Because the 3 Back to the Future films were all made, well, number 2 and 3 were made directly back to back. But I love that there's kind of little references and nods to things that they're going to throw into the second and third films.
Well, I don't know, did they plan for those, or did the writing of I think it's more the writing of the second really said, okay, we've had a hit, and how can we use that to our advantage and reference things really well? So they would have picked it apart and gone, okay, so we'll bring this in, we'll bring that in. But I also I don't know the history, you may know this more, where Zemeckis maybe did foresee how he was going to use the stuff from the first one into a second?
I think you're probably closer with what you were saying about how they went back and tried to reference a few things that they'd said in the first.
Yeah.
I know that the second and third were all shot at the same time. Kind of like they were making a 4-hour film that they just divided in half.
Right.
Whereas the first one, there was a bit of a gap between the first and second film. So it's probably more likely that they just made this reference and then ended up using that as a basis for the second film.
Obviously, there's something at the end of this first film where they indicated they were going to make a second. But the amount that they rely on the first film as part of the narrative in the second, I don't know if they would have planned everything, but maybe, it's possible they had a few things in mind. Like what you were mentioning.
Yeah, well, I mean, we only know as much as we've been able to look up or deduce ourselves. So if you have insider information, by all means, comment and let us know where we've gone wrong.
Tell us what trivia tidbits we haven't included in this podcast. This film is just rife with like little bits of trivia, and we only are going to present a couple of those. Like there's documentaries made on this film. It's got a lot going on.
All right, so we're moving ahead. The Libyans come. They shoot Doc.
The Libyans.
Run for it, Marty. I love how this is shot.
Yes.
I'm going to go a little nerdy here, but I love that we see Doc get shot, and it's all from Marty's perspective.
Yes.
Like almost point of view shots of his vision, like tucked behind the car. He's on the ground, so the camera's really low. We see it how he sees it, and it keeps cutting back and forth between what he's seeing and how he's reacting, showing his facial expressions to it,
Yep.
which just amps up the emotion of it so much. But there's just some really, really nice touches. Him trying to run away and then being in the headlights of the Libyan's truck, literally like a deer in headlights. He's frozen there, and then the gun jams.
Yes.
And it's just another one of those references to, like, it's all about second chances. Like, if you had a second chance to do something, how would you change it? Like, all of that is just so clever. It's just such clever storytelling.
Yeah, and I love, like you said, where the director chooses to put us into that perspective from Marty. It allows us to really invest in the tension that he, as the protagonist, is feeling, and we feel like we're in that car. Like, we feel like we are testing its limits to see if we can get away from the Libyans. Like, and I'm going to refer to the music again, because the music's just exceptional at that point. But everything that's happening in that scene is just so well done and so well executed that would exemplify how this film as a whole just is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, super fast cuts between things.
Yep.
Lots of kind of extreme close-ups of things that we should be paying attention to. So, like, the mirror to show how close the Libyans are behind Marty. The dashboard to show how close he is to getting to 88 miles per hour. Like, all of the cuts too are edited in time with the music.
Flux capacitor doing its thing.
Doing its thing, fluxing.
Fluxing. That's there's
Flux
a verb.
capacitor fluxing.
Yes, yeah.
But yes, so anyway, he inevitably does get up to 88 miles per hour and travels back to Peabody's farm.
I will call out the one criticism of overt exposition that comes out, like where it's a bit on the nose, when before Marty gets in the car and Doc goes, "Oh, I nearly forgot the plutonium. How else was I going to get back if I didn't take the plutonium?" And then he doesn't get to load the plutonium in time, and then Marty gets in the car and therefore justifies in 55 how he can't get back. So the delivery of that was just one. We have so much exposition throughout the film that's delivered effectively and it doesn't stand out. That one stood out for me.
I don't know, maybe my nostalgia is just getting defensive here, but that to me doesn't kind of stick out as I think on the other side of that, if we'd gotten back and he was like, "Oh no, the plutonium's not in the car," I'd be like, "Well, why not?" Whereas throwing in that line,
I didn't go into believability of he would make an overt point of it to Marty.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, if that's the biggest criticism I've got of this film, this film's done pretty well.
It really has. It really has. And a film about time travel not having significantly more criticism with plot holes and things like that.
I know.
That's pretty impressive.
For sure.
We won't get into the sequels, but for this first one, it's pretty airtight.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything on Peabody's farm. I'm happy to move into the town.
Yep, for sure.
Mr. Sandman playing.
Yep, I love the shift of the like you said, the town square becoming 55 instead of 85, and how we have already experienced this town square. The way that they filmed it all with the Jennifer Marty sequence at the start, allowing us, the audience, to really take it in. So they deliberately kind of give us this view of the town, so we get to know it and recognize it, and therefore, when it isn't 85 town square, it's 55 town square, we can see the differences.
Yeah. And same thing when he parks the DeLorean behind the billboard that's going to be his street.
Yes.
And on the sign is his actual house,
yes.
a cartoon version of his house, but it says "Live in the home of tomorrow."
Yeah.
It's just so good.
Yep.
One thing I found really, really neat was that in the town, the movie that's playing at the movies is starring Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Who was the president in Marty's time.
Yep.
So good.
Yep.
We get a reference to that later with Doc.
I love that.
Who is that? Ronald Reagan. The actor?
They can call it out it's something that is happening in the current time when the film was released that would be so unbelievable 30 years ago that the actor Ronald Reagan could become president, and therefore it really contributes to Doc not believing Marty at the time, around the whole time, him being from the future and stuff. Yeah. It's great.
It really is. One thing that I find really fascinating about the film is that this is kind of like a nightmare scenario for Marty, going back to the 50s.
Which the music indicates to us as well.
Yeah. But the 50s is beautiful.
Yes.
Whereas in his time, everything's run down. Even in the 50s, it says, "Welcome to Hill Valley, a nice place to live." But in his time, everything's run down. And later on, when he gets back to his time, he's like, "Oh, everything looks great." It's just it's really interesting, the perspective of what's a nightmare and what's not.
The fear of the unknown and being comfortable with what your surroundings are. When Marty's only comfortable when he can get a tab or a Pepsi free.
Exactly right. Yep. The little truck comes by with the mayor's slogan. So in contrast to Mayor Goldie Wilson from Marty's time, you've got this mayor, re-elect Mayor Red Thomas, and he says the future is in your hands.
Yes.
Just fun little nods.
Yeah.
Cool. So he goes into the diner, meets George.
So the diner is and this film is just rife with locations that are really important to the story, but also really memorable and iconic. But anything that happens in that diner is by default going to be likely to be one of my favorite things that happens. So this is the first time we enter the diner, when he meets George. And then we meet Biff also in the diner.
And the young Billy Zane. Put a cork in it, Zane.
This is the first time we meet the young George, and I think this is more than old George, this is where Crispin Glover really shines.
The moment where Marty is staring at him.
Yep.
and he throws his spoon down and turns to him. And
Yes.
it's like, it takes him like 6 different moves in order to just turn around to Marty and say, what?
Yeah.
It's brilliant. There's no way you could direct that.
No.
That would have just been Crispin Glover and just...
And any other actor delivering it, it'd look exaggerated to the point of cartoonish, but not in with the feel of the film. But something about the way Crispin does it, it's Crispin.
It's really good. And I like little subtle things, like they're both stroking their hair in the same way. Like, in case you didn't know, these guys are related.
Yes. What's George's mum's name?
George's mum or Marty's mum?
No, Marty's mum.
Lorraine.
So, what I wanted to point out is that when Lorraine's dad hits Marty instead of George with the car, and he gets out of the car and yells out to his wife, "I've hit one of these kids again."
Yeah.
I want to know how many kids he's hit in the past.
Yeah, how often people
just a regular occurrence in his street that he's hitting kids.
And he's frustrated about it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hitting these damn kids again.
Yes.
Every time there's one of these dream sequences, or not dream sequences, but Marty waking up and he thinks it was all a dream in the Back to the Future films.
Yeah.
Leah Thompson is always talking in her old voice, as if she's Marty's mum, until the reveal.
Yeah.
Because obviously they're trying to make it seem like he's back at home. But yeah, she's got like that kind of elderly type voice, and then all of a sudden her voice completely changes when the lights go on.
Yeah.
But
Calvin Klein with the purple underwear plot device is just brilliant. I love it so much.
And they loved it so much because they do it again in the third film with Clint Eastwood.
Yes.
It's it's very, very funny. But I think this is probably one of my favorite scenes purely because of Michael J. Fox's acting.
Yeah.
How uncomfortable he is in the scenario. And he's like, when she's trying to like stroke his hair and he just like falls off the bed.
Yes.
He's so good at acting awkward.
Yeah.
And it ties back into he's just like George in that he is a little bit,
for sure.
a little bit awkward when his back's against the wall.
Yeah, trying to not say that his mum's hot, saying that she's like young or thin. I think he says thin.
Yeah, and it's such a bizarre concept for a film that, I mean, we're certainly not treading new ground here. Everyone points out the fact that Back to the Future has such a weird idea of like him and his mother being romantically entwined.
It's a fine line they tread, but they do it okay.
Because it's so wholesome.
Yes.
The whole film touches on some really like quite heavy subject matter at different points.
Yes.
But because of like the good nature and the good values behind it all, that's how they get away with it.
That point really comes to the fore for me when she kisses him in the car later on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, am I meant to be cringing at this? And you do cringe a little bit.
But you are, right?
But like, not to the point where you feel disgusted at the overall film and its representation, or using that as part of the story. Like, you know, they deliver it with relevance, and also they don't overburden the audience with it or anything like that. So yeah, it's a weird part, and it's certainly something that could be arguably contentious, but I feel that they walk the line okay with it.
100%. I am completely with you on that.
What I also liked about that scene at the house is getting to meet Lorraine's parents, and then getting to meet what's the name of her
Little
brother?
baby Joey.
Little baby Joey.
Better get used to these bars, kid.
That's right. You know, so there's tie-ins with the time jumping. I absolutely adore that stuff.
And again, we wouldn't know that if in the earlier sequence they hadn't said, "Oh, Joey didn't make parole again."
Put down the cake. Yeah.
So just all these things that they have to do early on for it to pay off later.
Yeah, I think this is the first time that Marty changes his wardrobe into something from the era. Like, he's obviously, does he put his...
Not with Lorraine's family,
no?
but
Okay,
when he goes to Doc's house, Doc gives him some clothes.
So it's Doc that gives him the clothes. So this is where I wanted to point out that I feel that Marty's wardrobe in the 50s is absolutely rocking. Every single shirt that he gets to wear in the 50s is awesome.
I'm with you 100%. But also, I love his 80s attire as well.
Oh, look, of course, but like that's him like just being of the time, of the trend.
Yeah.
But like I love that they make Marty cool in the 50s as well through his wardrobe. Like and certainly in contrast to George's clothes,
yeah.
who they're really geeky. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too. I guess it's almost like Marty's approaching his 50s wardrobe through the lens of someone from the 80s.
Yes.
So that's why it's so cool.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. His outfits are amazing.
Now, you did refer to it. This is where he then goes and meets 55 Doc.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this scene as well.
Where he's wearing like the headgear.
Yes.
You know what that means? This damn thing doesn't work at all.
So there's that. But what I love about it is that the way they've been able to de-age Doc, or like in a way that is still tied in with the joke that Doc hasn't aged. He looks slightly younger, like his hair's a bit different, and there's just something about the way that they subtly use the makeup between 55 and 85 where Doc does look somewhat different of age, but not to the point where it looks like it's 30 years. It actually looks like a lot less, and that's part of the joke, that Doc doesn't look any younger or older, even though 55 Doc does look a little bit younger.
Yeah, and they always like hammer that joke home. Anytime he sees himself in photos or on footage or something like that, he's like, "Oh my god, look how different I look!" Like it is very funny. In the second film, he gets plastic surgery to make him look younger again. He's like, "You look great, Doc." He looks exactly the same. It's just. It's a very funny joke, and it never gets old either. This is when we learn about the 1.21 gigawatts, and Doc has a little freak out and runs through the whole house. Christopher Lloyd is just so theatrical in his physical comedy.
Yes.
And we see that way more at the end of the film when he's actually trying to send Marty back. But just him running through the house, erratically throwing his arms up in the air, it's just so entertaining. Like he really is that mad scientist type character. And I love that all of that is really grounded in a sense of brilliance, not just in what he's inventing, but he always has this really good like perception of the world, and he brings up a lot of really interesting points about Marty's life and how like he's got a really nice moral code as well. So he can be weird and erratic and crazy, but anytime he says something, you're kind of like, he's right. He's like...
He's still perceptive. He's still like down to earth and understands humanity for sure. And also understanding philosophically that learning anything about yourself from the future would have ramifications as to how you approach the way you live your life. And like, so he has not just the science aspect to him, but this philosophical understanding of the world. So, like again, like Marty, a very nuanced character. Really impressive stuff. But what I do love about this scene is when he gets to watch the footage of the 85 Doc. What does he call the video camera? He calls it like a portable TV studio or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. You're testing my memory now.
Like the label he gives the camcorder is just so impressive. Like I think it's portable TV studio. Yeah.
I love how they work out the plan in this scene and how everything has to line up. So this is what I was mentioning before. If Jennifer hadn't written her number on the flyer, so Marty's trying to say that she loves him, so she holds up the note she's written, and then Doc at that moment says the only thing that can produce 1.21 gigawatts is a bolt of lightning, and then Marty's literally holding the flyer in front of his face, talking about when it's going to get struck. Like everything lines up so perfectly.
Yeah. And the fact that they had a reason for Marty to hold on to the flyer earlier on
because he loves Jennifer.
Yeah, and Jennifer.
And why wouldn't he? She's still Claudia Wells at this point.
Well, she's also said on the back of that flyer, "I love you," and given him her phone number.
I did do a Back to the Future dress up once, and I had the flyer in my pocket. Of course I did. But here's the embarrassing part. I also wrote the phone number on the back and copied her handwriting. But it's a little bit sad when you write a "I love you" to yourself on a flyer.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's got a meta level of sadness that you did that as well.
Yeah. I don't think you have to dig too deep to see the level of sadness there. It's right on the surface.
Oh, very good.
Okay, so they end up going back to school so that they can see what's going on, because Doc realizes in this scene too that Marty has inadvertently gotten in the way of his parents' meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to go into school and kind of assess the situation. And this is where we see for the second time Strickland. Strickland!
Yeah, do it once.
Well, I have to, yeah. I ended up taking it out of our edit for Top Gun, so I have to put it back into this edit. And like Doc, Strickland looks exactly the same, but they get away with it because Marty just says the throwaway line, Jesus, didn't that guy ever have hair?
Yeah.
So this is when Marty sees himself in George for the very first time.
Yes, and so this is where Marty approaches George, and George is writing some science fiction stories, and I made a particular note in the way Crispin Glover delivers that line of science fiction stories. His acting is just so captivating. Like, I find Crispin Glover in this film to just be, like I said, he's a scene stealer. He connects with Marty really well, so they work really well whenever they're in a scene together. But his action and his voice delivery, like everything he does and says, is just so riveting to me.
Yeah. But it's amazing how it can be so engaging to us, and yet he still presents as so boring to everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, even Doc says, what did your mother ever see in this guy?
Yeah.
And that's also when they bring up the Florence Nightingale thing. Again, just Doc showing his brilliance about knowing Florence Nightingale. This is also the first time we get a good look at Biff in that time period and how threatening he can be. So earlier we saw him in the diner.
Yes.
And he sort of got George to do his homework, but he's very casual, like, I don't want to see you around here anymore. But in this one, he gets quite physical. He gets physical with Lorraine, but then he also gets quite physical with Marty as well.
Oh, when they're in the food hall of the school.
This is the very first time we can see just what a bad guy he is and how threatening he is as a presence.
Yep. And like as a villain character, I think Biff Tannen goes down as one of the best. Like, he's just so like intimidating, and like his physical presence as an actor, but also like what he is. But my favorite part of his character development is like when he delivers the lines incorrectly. So when he would say,
"Make like a tree and get out of here."
So good, love it to bits. And like if you know the later films, that obviously gets elaborated on a bit more.
Well, his older self calls him out on it.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Leave, make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it
while
wrong.
you bring that up, like just a digression point. When I watch this film, when I go back to it now, it's so hard to not watch this film and think about the tie-ins with the later films. Like, I think you made the point where technically maybe you saw Back to the Future 2 first before you saw Back to the Future?
Well, yes, only because, and my dad will be mortified to hear this because he's the one that got me into Back to the Future, but I always remembered Back to the Future 2 and 3 a lot more because those were the ones that they showed on TV a lot.
Yeah.
And they would show them back to back on a movie night. And I always thought I'd seen the first one because so much of the first one gets included in the second one.
Yeah, see, I've seen the second one more, just because it was a more popular film in general, I think. They did a really good job with it. It came out 4 years after the first one. But because I've seen that one so much of what happens in the first one, which gets used in the second one, I put it into that context in terms of my memory. So when we hear Biff say, "Get like a tree and leave, get out of here," in my mind, I have older Biff
telling him off for it.
"Get like a tree and leave." Anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a stroke of brilliance to bring so much of the first one back into the sequel because of how popular it was.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yes,
play
absolutely.
on people's nostalgia of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you were talking about Biff as a villain, like how well he's represented in that canteen. Might jump ahead because I think he's arguably better represented when we get back to the diner.
Yes. Okay, so before the diner, we have the science fiction theatre scene.
Yes.
This is one of my favorites. It's so short. It is so short, but I love how Marty is able to use the fact that George is into science fiction theater and into comic books and stuff like that, and use his knowledge of the future to manipulate George into doing this. So he dresses in his hazmat suit. He's got a hairdryer as a laser gun. He's got the tape recorder there, and he convinces him that he is from the planet Falcon and that he is Darth Vader, and does the little Star Trek hand sign. So mixing both Star Wars and Star Trek references together, a major faux pas, but it's just such a great scene because it gives you that science fiction element that's separate from the time travel of the film. It gives you almost like a spaceship-y kind of quality to it. The way the light's coming through the windows looks like the panels of a spaceship behind him.
Yep.
He's so ominous as that presence. But yeah, one really fun detail is the tape. It says Edward Van Halen on it.
Yeah.
So I always wondered why it didn't just say Van Halen, like it's a regular Van Halen tape. It's because they never got permission from the band members to play a Van Halen song, but they specifically got permission from Eddie Van Halen to play one of his songs. So he ended up, I don't think it was an original song, I think it was something from another film that he'd done, but I just find those little details really fun.
Yep.
Like stuff that you have to be like, what? Why have they done that? And kind of look into it.
Yeah, and knowing that Marty's right into playing guitar as well, you could totally see that he, like, of that era in the mid-'80s, he would be a massive Van Halen fan. So, yeah, it made sense that he'd have that tape on call, but also the idea that something like that would be so futuristic to someone in 55, they're like just having like guitar feeding back and they're making noise, that it must be something alien in nature.
Yeah, well, there is an extended version of the scene. When you watch it, you're like, oh, we get all this information in the next scene. And so I'm so glad, like, it's just a really good example of good directing and good editing that they took it out, not sort of giving information that you don't need in a film. I hate when things are kind of spelled out. And so, yeah, it's almost like I appreciate what's not in there just as much as I appreciate what is.
For sure. So then after the science fiction theatre scene, that drives George into deciding that he is going to go after Lorraine after all. With Marty's help, he goes to the diner and approaches Lorraine, tells her that he is her density.
He sure is.
But prior to that, he built up his confidence by ordering a milk chocolate. Like I love it.
Slammed his hand down, like that classic bartender scene where they want a drink and they slide it across. It's very, very good.
Yeah, this whole sequence of a scene is just glorious. Like that, I love it so much.
I mean, you don't have to tell me, mate. I do shot-for-shot recreations of this scene every year with my year 8s because I love it that much.
So the Biff Tannen trip, and then how he gets up and Marty does the over-the-shoulder look to then have that perspective of Biff's size and like
he just towers up
and you just see Marty's eyes and that's it. I love that framing.
Even things like as soon as Biff enters the diner, the jukebox cuts out.
Yep.
Just like, that's not realistic of what would happen. No. It's about as realistic as the Fonz hitting it and it's starting up. But it really like adds to the scene. You're like, literally everything stops for this guy when he walks in because he's that threatening as a presence. It's always been really clear that this is an amazing scene in the film, in that they repeat it in the sequels again.
Yes.
So anything that really works in this film, and I mean it all really works, but anything that's super popular, we see repeated.
Yep.
And that's so much fun. Like the sequel, we have the hoverboard chase scene. In the third film, they've got the horse chase scene. Like they do so well to be able to take these fan favorite moments and pay service to them. I'm quite happy to move on from the skateboard chase. I know it is a great scene. I could talk about it all day, but I am wary that we're probably spending a little bit. Well, it's me. I'll take the heat on that one. I love the film so much.
We called it at the start of this podcast that we would have many things to talk about.
We did even joke about splitting it into 2 podcasts, and I think Mr. Whittle was joking a lot more than I was. I was kind of like, well, maybe we should. I could speak for 2 hours on this. So, yes. All right, moving ahead. So we go back to Doc's house. Lorraine obviously follows Marty home. Hilarious again because she never called a boy or chased after a boy.
Yes.
And then they do the model. It's kind of like the plan of what's going to happen. And Doc goes, "Oh, excuse the crudity of the model." It's like a perfect to scale replica of the entire town that he's whipped up in like a day.
Himself down there. Yeah.
And then it goes wrong. It sets on fire, and he does that shocked face. It's just I like that. Even though he's brilliant and things always go wrong, it's kind of like and when they actually do the plan for this, something's going to go wrong as well. Everything that Doc does, no matter how much he's fine-tuned it down to the finest detail, everything always goes wrong with him. And that can happen on a small-scale model, or that can happen with a major plan.
Which, like, I think it's that scene or thereabouts where it kind of brings us to the end of the second act of the film, and then we start entering into the final scenes of the film. And something that stood out, and I'll bring it up now, even though I didn't really become aware of it as I watched last night until after it had happened, but this film is particularly brilliant because it gives the audience multiple climactic endings. All right, there's not many films that do it this way, where you think that the big final ending has happened, but there's two more. All right, or arguably two more. There's definitely two climactic endings. George finally winning, then Marty returning, and then you could also Doc's not being dead and dealing with that whole thing as well, and Marty getting home and finding things are better. That's not climactic per se, but we have multiple endings in terms of like the big tension builds, and that is what makes this final act of this film so exciting. And like people who know film know that films can fall down in the final act. They can fall down in the second, and they can fall down in the final.
Or, I feel, as we looked at last week, they could fall down from the very beginning.
Yes, that's true as well. But I feel like as I watched this film, I was invested from pressing play and from the first minute. But it was the final act that really got me being reminded how great this film was.
Yeah, and they're parallel storylines too. So you've got George's arc, but then you've also got Marty's arc.
Yes.
And they play out virtually simultaneously. So George standing up against Biff happens immediately before Marty plays at the dance. So George's confidence to do something because he believes in it. If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
Get your damn hands off her.
And then Marty playing at the dance after he's just been turned down for playing at the dance and getting a really good reception from it.
Just because you're bringing it up, I want to make the point that I was very appreciative that, like the skateboarding, Marty playing the guitar was believable. So I reckon Michael J. Fox at least knew a little bit of how to play the guitar, because there's nothing worse than watching a film where a character is playing a guitar and you can see that they have no idea how a guitar actually works. Whereas Michael J. Fox looks like he knows how to play a guitar.
And vocals too?
Yes, so that vocal take was his. Like,
was his? Okay.
He's obviously, it's a pre-recording, but that is his vocal take for Johnny B. Good. Yep.
He sounds good.
Yeah,
he sounds Johnny B. Good. I love the gag with Marvin Berry's being, like, his cousin is Chuck Berry, the writer of Johnny B. Good.
Yep.
People have joked about how they've put Marty in this film and he's taken the credit for Chuck Berry's song.
I love, by the way, when all the musos get out of the car when they're approached by Biff's henchmen, and what do they call them? I don't want to get attacked by
reefer addicts. Yeah.
Yes. Well, so I've got another criticism of the film. This is probably the second of two, so that's all I've got is, but that superimposition of the hand when Marty's hand is fading, that's poorly done.
And I mean, I know how we would do that now, but I'm not necessarily sure how they were doing it back then. It probably would have been what's like the black screen where they do the inverse and they take it out,
something like that. But like, to speak to that, by 1985, a little film called Ghostbusters had been released, and
I'm not sure I've heard of that one.
There's a podcast to come. Anyway, I use that as a benchmark as to what the 80s could do in terms of special effects. Okay, so knowing that 3 years later, now maybe they didn't have the same budget. I don't know.
Well,
right?
Hang on. You don't think there's anything janky in Ghostbusters?
There is, absolutely, but it's like generally done pretty well for 82, And then in 85 to have a hand that, even the angle that the hand is put in front of the screen doesn't really match because it's very centered. I just think that was poorly done. But
well, they can't just turn down their opacity tool. It's not as easy
as opposed to our students who can do it.
Who can do it. We believe in you.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things in this scene. I love that his mum says that it's not like I've never parked before, but she's also smoking, she's drinking. This idea that we were all kids once.
Yes.
So no matter how tightly wound she is in Marty's time, she was a kid too. She was equally reckless. And he takes on the parental role.
Yes.
Telling her off for it.
Yep.
So good. Because he's also taken on kind of like a mentor parent type role for George as well, kind of coaching him through it.
Absolutely.
So I love that they completely reverse their position. There's a sequence where George is dancing by himself, and it's such a quirky kind of Crispin Glover-esque movement.
Yep.
And it's so good, but it's also it's very controversial because this is the clip that they ended up using, the only clip of Crispin Glover that they ended up using in the sequel film.
Right.
That he ended up suing over.
Yes.
But again, we'll get to that in the final sequence. The scene ends with Marty, such a nice name. They point that out. And yet, they still called their first child Dave.
Yeah. But, she had it in the back of her mind ever since, maybe one day I'll use that name Marty for one of my kids. Maybe the kid who is going to go back and then tell me it's a good name. Maybe I'll wait for that kid.
Yeah, maybe I'll wait for the kid that, as he grows up, he looks a lot like the person that I went to the dance with back in the 50s. And then I'll call him Marty.
Yes.
Alrighty, should we move on to the clock tower scene?
Yes, which is got to be one of the best in the whole film. I just love the tension build on it. Like I've mentioned before, feeling those 4 minutes from then even before that, Marty wanting to tell Doc, to look out for himself in the future, that kind of stuff.
Again, constant reminder of time. The scene even starts with him looking at 6 different clocks in a row and going, damn!
Yes.
Damn! Just clocks everywhere. Don't forget, time is important.
Yes, time is important, everyone. But yeah, the idea that Marty has to then make a decision as to look out for himself because time is critical, but he really wants to help out Doc as well. And Doc, and tells him, no, go to the DeLorean, go get it done. You only have 4 minutes left, and then we get the sequence of action. This whole scene is just nail biting.
The thing is, even though it's you want to give up as an audience member, you're they're never going to make it. They should just give up. The DeLorean's not working. Doc's on the top of the clock tower. He's not going to make it. But Doc never gives up. He's kind of there's one point where he's oh, this is a disaster. And then he's no, I need to focus. I need to get into it. And that just speaks enormously to his character.
Yes.
Every time something goes wrong in any of these films, Marty's kind of I don't know what to do. He goes to Doc. Mm-hmm. And Doc always comes up with the solution for it. He is the driving force in this film. Sometimes he can be seen as just a background type character to Marty influencing everything that's going on. But Marty only convinces George to put his mind to it because that's the same advice that Doc gave him. So there's this really big chain of events, and Doc is the driving force behind everything improving in this film.
Yep.
I mean, not just because he invented the time machine, right?
But yeah, the whole setup of how they're going to use the car to capture the lightning bolt as well, the look of and having the DeLorean driving down that street of 1955 to what's the name of the town that they're in?
Hill Valley.
Hill Valley, yes. Sorry, I was going to say the name of the mall. So in Hill Valley, so that juxtaposition of the time difference as well. And then, but the lighting as well, they've captured that the lightning happening, but also what's happening in the street.
Wet ground again, then.
Wet ground again,
Sleep.
for sure, yeah. So that's a really good point. I'd never thought of that aesthetic, that they use that to kind of really accentuate the style of the film. And
My
scene.
students have an analysis on Back to the Future, and we look at this scene, so I hope they're paying attention.
You will be marked on this later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also like that in this scene, Marty realizes he can go back early.
Oh, that's brilliant. He's no, I'll just do this and everything will be okay.
Yeah. Which of course it isn't because the DeLorean breaks down. But it's yet another reference to that idea of second chances,
Yes.
and like it's never too late to fix things.
Yep.
Cool. Anyway, so it does work. It's successful. He gets back to his own time, and everything looks great, even though everything looks terrible.
Yep.
The bum. The bum that's
The
on
bum.
the... so he's not named in this film. Later on, he gets the name Red.
Yes.
It's a highly contentious point. Lots of people have been like, oh, Red. Does that mean he's Red Thomas, the mayor of the town from the 50s? But I believe that's not the case.
No.
I think I read somewhere that Michael J. Fox just ad-libbed calling him Red.
Yeah.
In that moment, and
Yeah.
it just coincidentally happened to be the same name as the man.
That the actor of who plays the bum is actually someone who has done little cameos through over 100 films. I think he's passed on now, but he was in a couple of John Carpenter films, like he's in Escape from New York, and he's in a couple of others as well. So he's
not The Thing.
maybe The Thing. I don't know. I can't remember what the other ones were, but yeah, he's. Like, when I saw his face pop up, I'm like, he's one of those faces where I'm like, I've seen you before. Now I have to go down an IMDb rabbit hole just to see who you are. Yeah, that happens a lot to me, guys.
Then, obviously, Marty gets back, Doc gets shot, he's wearing the bulletproof vest.
Yeah, of course.
And I find it hilarious. This is probably one of my reservations about the film, that he just goes, I thought, what the hell? And you're like, what? You've had like this strict code this entire time of making sure you don't interrupt the future or you don't change anything about the future. And then without any convincing, I just thought, what the hell?
When that scene happens, in my head, it's a Back to the Future 2 Biff Tannen going, bulletproof vest! Brilliant! Like, so this again speaks to how influential the second film is in my watching of the first film. Like, all these lines about how they reference stuff from the first film in the second film, they've just stuck with me in my memory.
Well, that's another great example of the tying the second and the third together because they were made at the same time. You see the Clint Eastwood film where he's wearing the bulletproof vest in the second one, and then in the third one he steals the idea.
So good.
All right, so should we go to the ending of the film where we actually get back, we see how his family has developed as a result of what Marty has changed. And so Dave no longer works at Chuck E. Cheese. He's got an office job.
He's no longer catching the bus and off to Chuck E. Cheese in the middle of the night. He is suited and booted and ready for his day.
Yes. What's Marty's sister's name? That's gonna kill me. Oh well. She clearly didn't have an impact on me in the film. But she's got many suitors who are chasing after her.
Yes.
The mum and dad have just come back from playing a round of golf.
Yes.
They're looking much better.
Yeah, Lorraine looks thin, which is Marty's measure of whether his mum is well or not.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yep.
And George, after they find the new books arrive, says the line, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. As if this is his slogan that he's created.
Which I love that because it exemplifies how we can look at our past in rose-coloured glasses and decide that we said the line, we've always thought that way, that kind of thing. So that
and we do that in life.
Yes.
If you told me something and then I was at a dinner party and you weren't there, I would absolutely claim it as my own. And often do, because I never invite you to my dinner parties.
As is the case.
I love how weak Biff is now.
Yes.
He comes in, oh, Mr. McFly, oh, hi, Marty. Like, that one incident has completely reshaped who he was as a person.
Yeah, which speaks to the guy, I don't remember the name of the actor who plays Biff Tannen, but he...
Thomas Wilson,
Wilson, that really shows that he's not one-dimensional as a bully either. I really love the delivery of that wimpiness at the end there as well. Yeah.
And that it is somewhat of an act, because later when he sees the DeLorean, he's more aggressive again, like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Let's talk the moral lesson.
Sure.
Of the film. So it is all about kind of believing in yourself and
if you believe in yourself, you will get a Toyota.
Yeah. But see, the rich aspect of it is merely an extension of the fact that they're happier now, that it's not that he's successful and made a lot of money, it's that he was able to write his book that he was really passionate about.
Yes.
This was a big reason why Crispin Glover never returned for the sequel films. So he always thought that it wasn't a good moral lesson to depict their happiness being judged through wealth.
Yes.
But I think that's probably just the easiest way for them to show how much things have changed. So how do you show that, yeah, he made his book and he's successful and he did what he wanted to do?
Yeah, and like, I don't know, are they really wealthy if they're still living in the
same house
in the same suburb? Like, they're more comfortable. And
those kind of details
confident.
are fun to think about too.
Yeah.
It's like their entire life has changed, but they still decided to buy the same property.
Yeah, I don't know. I would go with that it's an arguable point.
For sure.
Yeah.
Then we get this final sequence, which is kind of the setup for the second film. It gets repeated in the second film as well at the start.
Yes.
Because they obviously had to replace Elizabeth Shue. Or they didn't replace Elizabeth Shue, they replaced with Elizabeth Shue. But I love the difference in delivery between Doc in one sequence and then in the start of the next film when the same scene is done. I think Marty says to him, "What do we become, assholes or something?" And then Doc's like, no, it's fine. But then when they reshoot the scene, he takes a little beat to think about whether they become assholes first before he says no. But it's a really good way to end it because it kind of makes you want more. You're like, what's going to happen next? What's the next journey they're going on?
Yes, I love that they've upped the ante in terms of like the cliffhanger of sorts of what could they possibly do in the next film. Just to go, well, for starters, the DeLorean flies. Like, I reckon that's brilliant.
Yeah, it definitely is. Are there any other points that you needed to touch on? I mean, I feel I've been hogging the microphone. So.
I've been quite exhaustive with everything that I wanted to bring up. I think we didn't just say the word awesome over and over again. We talked about what was going on in the film.
We said it a lot.
Yeah, we did say, we had a lot of platitude for this film, for sure. But deservingly so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great film, and I mean, we don't need to tell you guys that. Presumably, you've watched it if you're listening to the podcast. So, hopefully, you were right there with us that entire time, appreciating it.
And then hopefully, you've also already hit like and subscribe on this podcast. Hopefully, you are considering what films we should be watching in the future. If not, then go back to your past and then think about the future in order as to what films we should be watching.
Yes, we love feedback. Well, we don't know if we love feedback. We don't get a lot of it, but we would love feedback, I'm sure. Whether it's positive, whether it's negative, you want to tell us stuff that you'd like us to change, to fix up. Just different segments and things you want us to talk about. We're always really encouraging that. So please do comment below with those tips and tricks.
If you've gotten to this point in the podcast, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
We better make like a tree and get out of here.
Yeah.
But thanks very much, guys, and see you next week.